Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you for checking out another episode. Remember to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this up on YouTube. Follow whatever podcast platform you're listening to the show on, and you can always email TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. So, a couple of weeks away from the movie big screen release of Depeche Mode M, and I may not be able to see it on the big screen. I'm a little bit bummed about this. So, there was one 4:15 showing. The rest of the screenings in theaters, not necessarily, they're near me, but a bit of a hike to get to. There was one 4:15 showing on Tuesday when it opens up on the 28th that I had purchased tickets to, and unfortunately, the movie theater said because of a technical difficulty, they canceled the screening. I have no idea why. They refunded my money. So I have purchased tickets to the 7 o'clock screening that night. It's just really difficult for me because of the schedule that I keep for my weekly radio show. It completely throws me off when I stay up late on a weeknight. And I know it's Depeche, and this is my, lifelong love of a band. And so I'm 85% sure that I'll be going to see it in the theater. It's been a really busy couple of weeks for me as of late, and some late nights that have really done a number just on my, I wouldn't say my health. I'm completely healthy, but it's been a difficult week sleep-wise for me, and I've had some late nights that have really thrown my sleep off game. This is all just way too much TMI information, so I am still planning on seeing it in the theater. Depeche Mode's making it difficult for me. More specifically, the movie theaters here in Minnesota are making it difficult for me because there aren't any screenings at earlier showtimes, which is bumming me out. But I don't want to bum you out. I want to talk about the positive things relating to Depeche Mode on the show, and particularly how Depeche Mode's kind of dominating pop culture right now with the multiple mentions of the band in the movie TRON Ares. I actually have the audio from the movie. I'll be sharing it with you on the show. So if you haven't seen TRON Ares, don't want to be spoiled, then definitely skip the rest of the show until you have a chance to go and see it. Unfortunately, the movie's not doing well at the box office, which is a bummer because I loved the film. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see it again in IMAX for an afternoon showing today after I'm done recording the podcast with my youngest. I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to see it on the big screen after seeing it last week. And unfortunately, it got dogged by a lot of early reviewers of the film, and I just don't know why. Most of the critic screenings and those that saw the advanced screenings were slamming the movie, and once it hit the theaters, the response from the audience was completely different, and the Rotten Tomatoes score reflects as such. I think the critics' rating is in the 50s, and yet the audience rating is like 87%. It's a fun movie. The Nine Inch Nails soundtrack is absolutely spectacular. The visuals are great. The storyline is on par with other Tron films. And, of course, the inclusion of Depeche Mode, not just in a needle-drop conversation, but also a conversation that strikes at the core of the film itself, makes it, unique and interesting and fun and endearing for this Depeche Mode fan. So I'm hoping, as a lot of other fans are, that the movie finds some legs in the coming weeks and that the good word of mouth that's going around now will be enough to sort of save it at the box office, because it certainly sets up for a sequel, and I would love to see it. Plus, given how Depeche Mode was included so prominently in the film, I'd like to see it be a success either way. So I'm going to play you the audio coming up here in just a moment. I have a portion of an article talking about its inclusion, Depeche Mode's inclusion in the movie. Some parts of the article I actually disagree with quite a bit. So I'll share this with you. We do have some listener feedback, and then for the podcast-only listeners, we will do another song commentary. I kind of struggled a little bit this week with the song that I wanted to choose, but based off of this article titled "The Meaning Behind the Depeche Mode Connection in TRON Ares," there was one song that I was eyeballing, and the comments made in this article ended up making up my mind as to what song I've decided to use. And so we'll get to that after listener feedback. And again, that will only be available for the podcast listeners. So let's get into the main topic of the show this week, and that is Depeche Mode's inclusion in the new film TRON Ares. So without getting into an abundance of detail of the story itself, but TRON Ares is a program written by the Dillinger Corporation to basically monitor and work within the Dillinger version of the grid. There's two different versions. Actually, there's three different versions of the grid in the film. You have the Dillinger version, you have the ENCOM version, and then you have the original ENCOM version going back to the 80s. And that's relevant within the second clip from TRON Ares in which Depeche Mode is included. Ares is played by the actor Jared Leto, who starts off a bit as the villain in the film, a program being used by the actual villain in the film to go and hack into programs and systems inside of the ENCOM grid. Now, through the course of the film, he ends up coming in contact while tracking down with the protagonist of the film and ends up struggling with his own sense of reality as he begins to make sort of a slow turn from a minor villain character to sympathizing and then ultimately helping the protagonist. The first inclusion of Depeche Mode happens once Ares in the real world ends up joining with the protagonist of the film. They're escaping from one of the locations wherein Just Can't Get Enough gets a needle drop and a bit of a conversation between Ares, Jared Leto's character, and the female protagonist in the film.
I just can't get enough. Depeche Mode, number 8 on the UK singles chart, 1982. I find their brand of pithy, catchy, timeless, and true 80s electropop to be deeply invigorating.
Now, I know that was a little bit to hear, so let me go ahead and run it again, and I'll help along with the dialogue here, since the audio was a tad low on that. So let me play that back again.
I just can't get enough.
So he starts playing I Just Can't Get Enough by Depeche Mode.
Depeche Mode, number 8 on the UK singles chart, 1982. I find their brand of pithy, catchy, timeless, and true 80s electropop to be deeply invigorating.
Basically saying he finds their brand of synth pop with a few other verbs and adjectives thrown in there to be invigorating as they continue to drive off and Depeche Mode plays in the background. Now, I will say that the inclusion of the Just Can't Get Enough needle drop in the film put a big smile on my face. I had a smile on my face watching the entirety of the movie. Even though it was a slight eye roll that, once again, Just Can't Get Enough decided to be the song of choice by the content creators of this particular film, much like it was used in Cocaine Bear and it's been used in ads before. As I've been receiving messages from many of you wishing that they had gone with a different track, I'm right there with you. But again, happy as a Depeche Mode fan that this was included in the film. And then came the surprise, and that was when you actually had an extended dialogue wherein Ares ends up on the original 80s grid having a conversation with Kevin Flynn, or basically a program version of Kevin Flynn inside the original 80s ENCOM grid, wherein they, once again, have a 52-second conversation about Depeche Mode.
Heard of Mozart?
I like Mozart.
Oh?
That said, if I'm being honest, I prefer Depeche Mode.
Really? Why is that?
I know one is considered the greatest composer in the history of Western civilization. The other is a synth pop band from the 80s, but I find their balance of technological exploration and pop hooks combined with
What's wrong?
I can't put my love of Depeche Mode into words. It's just,
What?
feeling.
So, what a lot of people don't realize, and let me play the beginning of this again, right? Okay, so again, Ares, Jared Leto's character, talking with Jeff Bridges and his character, Kevin Flynn.
Heard of Mozart?
Have you heard of Mozart?
I like Mozart.
I like Mozart. Uh-huh.
Oh?
That said, if I'm being honest, I prefer Depeche Mode.
Okay, so he says if he's being honest, he prefers Depeche Mode. And then he says, he gets into this, I don't know how to describe it, it's just a feeling. Which tells me, at least I hope, and I hope that in the expanded edition of the, well, not the expanded edition, but in the physical release and the making of the film, I hope that there is some commentary behind that, because that tells me that these are obviously fans of Depeche Mode to understand the connection that Depeche Mode has with its fans. However, what most people don't know is that the Mozart Depeche Mode, unless this is just an uncanny coincidence, is actually a callback or a reference to one of the other most recent inclusions of Depeche Mode being name-dropped in a film, and that would be the AI film Ex Machina, wherein Domhnall Gleeson's character is having a conversation, one of his first conversations with Eve, the AI, and she asks him specifically, do you like Mozart? And he says, I like Depeche Mode. Now, considering that these are both AI-related stories that are being told, I cannot imagine that the Mozart Depeche Mode combination comparison was just a simple coincidence. It had to be a callback to Ex Machina. I know that some people have gone so far as to say they felt it was a little ham-handed in the dialogue. And to that, I responded to a few people simply letting them know what I just told you, is that I'm fairly convinced that they were actually giving a nod to another AI film, and that was Ex Machina. Listen, be that as it may, what's been fantastic is to see Depeche Mode get as much exposure as they have been getting through this, at least online. I'm on X on a daily basis. I use X for my daily show prep. I'm on TikTok quite a bit on my own TikTok channel, and I can tell you there were dozens of posts that I saw that were doing the Ares quote of Mozart is better than Depeche Mode. To the point where I really hope at some point in time, and I don't know what circumstances will arise, where Dave and Martin will be together, again, unless it happens to be the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which is still supposed to happen sometime this year. I know that Def Leppard recently had theirs put on there, and I believe they even gave a mini performance, if I'm not mistaken. So that would probably be the best opportunity that we have for Dave and Martin to make a comment about this. So anyways, it was cool. I love the movie. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. And that second conversation about Depeche Mode and Mozart, I'm not going to lie, it brought a little tear to my eye. As a lifelong Depeche Mode fan, as I'm sure that you are as well, to see Depeche Mode get that type of recognition, it's great. And it's the kind of recognition that Depeche Mode, it falls in line with Depeche Mode's legacy. They're not a mainstream, for lack of a better word to describe it, band. They've always sort of been an underground band, even though they are incredibly popular. Not everybody has heard of them. But those that have, growing up in the 80s into the 90s and 2000s, having their inclusion along with Nine Inch Nails doing the soundtrack, of which Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor has certainly talked about Depeche Mode being a massive influence on them, it is abundantly appropriate to have them included in the film for as much as they were. Now, let me get to this article, though. Again, TRON Ares, the meaning behind Depeche Mode's connection, from Soap Central, wherein they write this: there is a reason why TRON Ares picked Depeche Mode of all bands. Their music is built on synth. It is mechanical, electronic, and robotic. Let me stop here. Completely disagree with those statements. I'll give the electronic part of it. if we're only talking about a certain part of their catalog, I'll give you the mechanical part of it, but I'm never going to go along with the robotic description with the band. I just think that's wholly inaccurate. And as a matter of fact, the song that I've chosen for this week's song commentary points exactly to pushing back on that statement. Again, and mechanical from a recent standpoint, from a recent perspective of Depeche Mode. And that's workable, right? There still is the electronic in a somewhat mechanical aspect, but Depeche Mode is always been filled with emotion and never robotic. I mean, if you want to talk about robotic, you can talk about the band that inspired Depeche Mode Kraftwerk, but I would never apply that term, even in their earlier work, to that description. Now, the article goes on to say, but that doesn't mean it's devoid of emotions and longing, and that sort of music makes perfect sense for an AI who lives between two worlds as a half machine, half a human. The sound itself feels like a bridge between circuits and souls. It is no accident that the creators used Depeche Mode instead of something orchestral. The music mirrors what Ares is going through, which is a clash between logic and feeling. And again, the author is dovetailing off of their own description, of which I take issue with. I think that Depeche Mode's inclusion fits more from what I was saying a moment ago, from the nostalgic connection with the audience standpoint. Meaning that, as I said in last week's episode, first talking about the inclusion of the band in the film, going back to that original Tron movie, and the electronic score that came with it, me being exposed to that prior to my hearing Shake the Disease, I think really put me on a path to enjoying electronic music more, because I became such a fan through the Tron soundtrack. And I'll even go back a step further for me personally. I think my love of electronic music, not robotic and not necessarily mechanical, but my love for electronic music really stems back to when I was a child, seeing the Main Street Electrical Parade and having the Main Street Electrical Parade album 45 at home on my record player. I really think that's where my love of electronic music started, and then ended up attaching itself to Depeche Mode. The article goes on to say, Ares does not utter a word when he experiences rain. He just holds out his hand and watches the raindrops fall onto his metallic skin, which is also very interesting because that is something very similar that happens in Blade Runner 2049. The film itself has a ton of callbacks to the original movie, and I'm kind of convinced, too, that there are many nods to other films, as I've mentioned, whether it be Ex Machina or, in this case, Blade Runner 2049. The drops slide down his fingers, and it is just a quiet scene. He is feeling something for the very first time, and it is something he can't name, but can't ignore either. That moment stirs as something within him, and we know he isn't an ordinary AI. Depeche Mode's songs often circle themes like desire, silence, and pain. They are simple but deep. I disagree again. Enjoy the Silence as a song that talks about the beauty and burden of emotion. Ares listens to that kind of music and gradually feels the ache of being human. And that is revolutionary for AI. TRON Ares uses that moment to show that emotion isn't something you can just program. It grows, it confuses, it changes you. So Ares is more than a mere program. But there's also a little irony here, they write. Depeche Mode's synth-driven sound is the kind of thing you'd imagine a machine would understand best. So Ares connects with it and feels natural, but also pretty emotional. And that makes the perfect middle ground. TRON Ares is saying that humanity lives in the moments we can't explain. It lives in the songs that make us feel something we don't have words for. Now, I'm being nitpicky here. I completely understand the article, the author of the article's intention, and there is some level of truth to it. As a hardcore fan that does a weekly Depeche Mode show, it's kind of my job to take issue with that. If we were debating, I would certainly challenge the author on a couple of the things here. And again, going back to that mechanical, but more specifically robotic, especially with Depeche Mode's later work. I am constantly surprised at when I'm not casually listening to the music. And I think you know the difference, right? There are times we just have it on in the background, and there are times when we are locked in listening or locked in and singing, attaching the music to a particular moment in time when we need Depeche Mode, when they're acting as a friend. You know, and those moments where I recognize some of the, and I don't use this as a pejorative, I don't use this as a negative, but some of the tropes that Depeche Mode uses in their music, and specifically the guitar intro or the guitar lead-in to particular tracks. In the earlier days, I would say that the guitar was there, but less in your face. There was more processing laid on top of Martin's guitar work, where in latter works, it's much more upfront. That is a guitar. You go and listen to Violator, and I made a comment about this several podcasts back, listening to Violator when talking about the anniversary of the album and making comparisons of it to Songs of Faith and Devotion. And while on the surface, I want to say those albums are dramatically different, but in reality, the music isn't that far removed from each other. I think Violator is cleaner. It has a crispness in the production, which is much different than the grittier Songs of Faith and Devotion. That being said, it's clear that Martin wasn't that far removed in the songwriting process and the starting points of which he created those demos, especially as Martin transitioned from the piano to the guitar in the songwriting process, using the guitar more often in latter works than earlier in the band's career when he was starting off songs by riffing off the piano. So, as always, what are your thoughts on this? Am I completely off base? Do you agree? Are they robotic in your opinion? I'd love to hear from you. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com, or leave that comment up on YouTube. Sorry, my sound effects were sticking there a little bit. All right, let's get to your listener feedback this week. And first, we will start off with a YouTube comment from Sparky Malarkey, who writes this. I saw the new TRON Ares movie, and I loved it. I heard some Depeche Mode songs when I was a little kid, but I never really knew anything about them. But Ares and his love of Depeche Mode convinced me to look into the band some more, and here I am. And they found the podcast. And I don't know about you, but that warms my heart. Anytime anybody of any age finds Depeche Mode for the first time, for any reason, that makes me happy. So, good luck there, Sparky Malarkey, and I hope you keep listening to the show. All right, Rome Ed writes in this week and says this. So much to talk about. First, let me say that I've been listening to your weekly podcast, and let me say it is a good listen to someone talk so passionately about DM. Thank you, Rome. I remember you talked about playing The Angel and how the album got you through tough times. And let me say I'm glad it did. I myself have a couple of albums that will always stay with me. Black Celebration, Memento Mori. I'm sure there are more DM fans who themselves have those particular albums that got them through tough times. Now, going back to how I got introduced to DM, I always loved music since I was 3 or 4 years old. When I was 9, I've listened to a mixtape that my dad had, and one of the songs was Master and Servant. That song stuck with me because of the sound, new sounds, and the only time I've heard anything that had sounds that were new and unfamiliar was Star Wars. Now, I didn't know the name of the song at the time, nor the band's name. A year later, a classmate who was also my neighbor asked me to come over because he got this new mixtape that his uncle let him borrow for a week. It was the singles collection. I was hooked right away, especially now knowing the name of the band too, hence the Master and Servant song. Then later came Black Celebration, masterpiece. I'm going to end the email by saying I've watched TRON Ares and I really enjoyed it. I don't get the hate, I thought it was fun. The best lines in the movie had to be the lines regarding DM. And yes, DM is a feeling better than Mozart. Thank you for reading my email. By the way, Exciter is an underrated album. It reminds me a bit of the Nine Inch Nails albums Year Zero and With Teeth, except Depeche Mode songs are more melodic. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your week, Rome Ed. Thank you, Rome. It's always great to hear from you, and I know when any new news drops Rome is going to be right there with an email to let me know about it. Whether I've seen it or not, he wouldn't know, but he always sends me the stuff right away. I think I get his emails first before I get anybody else's. All right, next up, Gareth Alexander writes in. A quick email regarding last week's subject. In the 80s, I was at university at St. Andrews, Scotland. I'm Scottish. I was going out with a girl from Rochester, New York, who was on her year abroad. She was really into British music, especially Depeche Mode, and was writing music reviews for a student paper, for a student newspaper, the St. Andrews Chronicle. We went to see Depeche Mode on the Music for the Masses tour in Edinburgh, where she managed to get an interview with Martin Gore the afternoon of the gig. On the day we went through Edinburgh, we went to their hotel and were there when their bus tour arrived. I remember clearly seeing Alan Wilder in a leather jacket getting off the bus. I made myself scarce, and she stayed for the interview. When I asked her about it later, and this bit that has stuck in my mind all these years, she said that she questioned him directly about A Question of Time and its lyrical references to a 15-year-old. And Martin emphatically stated that it was a song about being protective to someone younger rather than another interpretation. I've often wondered if she was the first person to ask about those lyrics. Anyway, love the pod. Cheer, Gareth Alexander. Gareth, thank you so much for sharing that. And I don't know. I know that we had a lot of people that were mentioning that and certainly correcting me regarding the exact intent of Little 15, but that's probably a fairly exclusive interview. If she had the opportunity to find that somewhere, I don't know if you're still in contact or not, or if you know where to find it in that particular newspaper in the archives. I guess it would be microfiche for those that have been around long enough to know what I'm talking about. That would probably be a pretty coveted interview, especially considering if she was willing to go there on that question. I would be curious what other questions she went and asked Martin at the time. All right, next up, let's hear from Jon, who says, who writes this. Talking about Sleep Token and my recent discovering them. Funnily enough, Jon says, I discovered them because of their intro song, The Summoning, is almost identical to the trainee intro into Somebody. I would categorize Sleep Token alongside alt-prog metal bands, such as Leporus, I don't know that one, Soen, and Deftones, who are influenced by Depeche Mode, either directly or indirectly, absolutely aware of that last one, and who share a similar dark mood. As I mentioned in an earlier email, there used to be a strange antagonism between heavy metal fans and DM fans in European communist countries, Eastern European communist countries at the time. We DM fans were mocked for listening to artificial, doing that thing with my fingers, music, and told DM we're not proper musicians. But times have changed now. Quite a few renowned metal acts have cited DM as a direct influence, including In Flames, Gojira, Opeth, Dillinger Escape Plan, Paradise Lost, Linkin Park, Fear Factory, and Him. In my home country, a DM fan hosts the longest-running heavy metal show. A few years ago, I even inspired him to play 2 hours of hard and heavy Depeche Mode covers on his show. So it's no surprise to me that you like Sleep Token. I like them too. Cheers, Jon. Thank you for that, as always. And last up, Andrew Fallon from Essex, England, writes in and says, thanks for the podcast. Useful, really useful, and thanks for promoting me as a friend of the show. You guys are all friends of the show. I appreciate that you write in. In the run-up to Depeche Mode M, I just wanted to share a few observations about DM as a live act and how they compare to some of the other big players. Recently, my wife made me go see Coldplay on their Music of Spheres tour. A couple of weeks later, we saw the Oasis on their Live 25 reunion tour. I'm not a Coldplay fan as such, but I have to admit that they were amazing. Chris Martin is a really good frontman. Plus, there were loads of fireworks, big screens, and a sea of LED wristbands. Oasis were really good too, with a huge video screen and a big firework display at the end. Despite all of this, and putting my own biases aside, I still think Depeche Mode are the better live act than both these bands. like Chris Martin, Dave is a really good frontman and makes Liam Gallagher seem a bit boring in comparison. Oasis had huge video screens, but on the whole, the visuals weren't great. Coldplay's visuals were good, but nowhere near as good as Depeche Mode's. DM's visuals are slick, dramatic, and really add to the songs without being too jazzy or over the top. Fireworks are nice, but not essential, and while LED wristbands add to the atmosphere, they also encourage people to wave their hands around, and that can be even more annoying. In short, as a live act, Depeche Mode are the winners, with Coldplay a close second and Oasis lagging behind in third place. Thanks again and keep up the good work. Best wishes, Andrew Fallon, Essex, England. Thank you for that, Andrew, as always, and all the friends of the show that wrote in this week. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. My apologies, by the way, for not having a louder cut of the Just Can't Get Enough clip from the movie. I didn't get a chance to preview it before I started the show this week, and so to have pulled out of the podcast and gone back and re-edited that would have taken too much time. So my apologies on that, and perhaps I'll bump up the audio and give it a proper play on next week's episode. So for you YouTube listeners, I would encourage you to go and check out the podcast for the final portion of today's show, a song commentary that I'll do here in just a moment. Either way, I hope you will all, before I get to this portion of today's show, I hope if you're a science fiction reader or audiobook listener, you'll take a moment and check out my science fiction space opera series. I love Star Wars. I'm an emotional guy, obviously. I love Depeche Mode. I set my future, 7 books in all, completes the series, in the future, where air and spaceflight culture have replaced car culture, inspired in part by Depeche Mode, life in the so-called space age, the world we live in, and life in general. The main protagonist of the stories, Taft Guardia, is a massive Depeche Mode fan, and I sort of ripped a trope from Ernest Cline in Ready Player One, where he tapped into the 80s, and I made the music of the 80s through the 2000s, particularly alternative music surrounding Depeche Mode, nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story set in 2172, while also including some direct and indirect references to the band, and telling an exciting science fiction space opera saga, wherein, after Earth faces its end, you will follow the adventures of pilots Taft Catha and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future and their own far from Earth. It is a fun and fast-paced, action-packed science fiction adventure without an agenda, and it's all available on Amazon.com. Just search for EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, at Amazon.com, and Jon, Jon Justice, and you will find all 7 books in the series, available in ebook, free on Kindle Unlimited, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook, produced and narrated by me.